Welcome to the Family Office Success Podcast, where we explore the strategies, the insights, and the best practices that help families and their advisors build and manage successful family offices. I am your host, Christi Van Rite, and each episode we dive into the key elements of running a family office. Whether you're a family looking to structure your advisory team for long-term success, or you're a professional managing the complexities of a multi-generational enterprise. From financial oversight and operational efficiency to selecting the right advisors and creating a lasting legacy, this podcast is here to provide practical guidance and expert perspectives. Let's get started. Welcome to the Family Office Success Podcast, where we talk all things family office. I am so excited to have Miss Thomasina Williams on with us today. If you have not met her in your family office travels, I know that you are going to enjoy this conversation. So let's get started. Thomasina, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to have a conversation with us about what it is you do.
Thank you so much, Christy. I really appreciate you having me, and thank your listeners for listening in on this conversation. Hope they get some
Yeah.
morsels, some nuggets that they find useful.
Oh, there's no question in my mind that everybody is going to be like taking notes throughout this one. You and I have kind of run in the same circles for the last, I don't know how many years in the family office world. And then we got to get connected in Austin. Was it last year? I
Yes.
think,
hmm
which was super fun to do. I don't know if you remember that exactly or not. I think we probably both thought it was just going to be like a quick little happy hour dinner, and then hours later we were both like, oh, it's probably time to wrap this up and get back to the rest of why you were in Austin and work. So yes, so obviously I so thoroughly enjoyed that conversation that night at the Salty Sow in Austin, that we've gotten to know each other since and gotten to do a little bit of work together. So happy that you're here, excited to tell your story and how you work with families. So with that, you have a very rich history. So if it's all right with you, I'm going to let you explain how you got here, how you got to this point, and what it is that you do for families now. And then we'll jump into kind of our bigger topics of how you work with families and some of those nuggets that families and family offices can take away. So over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you for having me. I too also enjoy that conversation that night in Austin. It seems so long ago. Um, so essentially, most of the family office world, understandably, is focused on a family's financial assets, which is obviously vitally important. I, however, work with the owners and the beneficiaries of those assets, helping them figure out how to become more connected, more capable, and more engaged stewards of both the being. So I refer to it as family leadership development, focusing on the family side of family office or the family side of family wealth. People often ask me, well, that's so interesting. How did you get into this work? Are you a therapist? No, I'm not a therapist. No aspirations to be a therapist. I believe I was led to this work. It's divine intervention because of my own family's history. My first career was as an attorney. I practiced law in Miami for almost 20 years. Never did anything having to do with trust and estates, never wanted to do anything having to do with trust and estates. From Miami, I went to New York and worked with one of the largest private foundations in the country doing philanthropic strategy, philanthropic advising. And at that time, at least, it was a 3 year commitment. So I thought, oh, this will be cool. I can do anything for 3 years. And who wouldn't want to hang out in New York for 3 years, right? Renewed, stayed for a second 3-year contract and then needed to figure out what else I wanted to do. I knew it was not going back to practice law. I thought it might have something to do with working with families around philanthropy because the particular portfolio that I had was one of the largest ones in the country in this particular area. And
Wow.
oftentimes, family foundations that didn't have the level of resources, research capability that we did would come to me and ask me, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And we would do some shared grant making. So I just started researching and I came across a study which talked about how more sophisticated, wealthy families use philanthropy as a strategic tool to strengthen the family as much as for the philanthropic cause. So, we might see the Christi Van Rite wing of the local hospital, but Christi's family has gone through a whole process of figuring out how to work together to make decisions about, well, what are we going to do with these philanthropic dollars? How much in philanthropic dollars, perhaps? Do we give to healthcare? Do we give to the arts? Do we give to education? If we want to give to anything, there are any number of avenues that we could pursue. How do we decide which way to go? How do we then do due diligence on the organizations that we want to make this philanthropic investment in? How do we read financial statements? How do we conduct business meetings? Because essentially, a foundation is a business, it just doesn't have a for profit goal. And I was really intrigued by the high degree of intentionality around using philanthropy in that way. So I just started researching, and then I came across another study which talked about it was the first time I'd heard the term shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And I thought, oh my gosh, you mean this is a thing? It wasn't just my family that couldn't keep it together. My family's wealth was lost in the second generation. I'm the third generation. And again, it was like an epiphany for me that this is a challenge that most families have, sustaining the wealth from generation to generation to generation so that you're building on it and not having to start over. And that is why I say that I was led to this work to try to figure out how can I course correct for my own family. And then I just got really enamored with understanding the data behind the contribution that family businesses make. And that's how most people get their wealth is through some business that was started at some point and decided to go all in. There could be no better contribution that I could make than to use my skills both as a lawyer and the work that I did in philanthropy to help families sustain what they had from generation to generation, as well as help my own family course correct. And while the tendency is to focus primarily on the assets, there's a lot of research which shows that while that's vitally important, we also need to think about and work with those who are the owners and beneficiaries of those assets. And so that's why I choose to do the work that I'm privileged to do today.
I love it. I love it. I always find it so interesting hearing everybody's stories and how we got to where we are. I mean, some of us fall into it, others of us find little bits and pieces, and then, like you, find little rabbit holes and start going down them and figuring out, oh, that's actually really interesting. How do I
Mm-hmm.
apply that on a bigger level? So that's awesome. I also think the one of the interesting things that you do that's a little bit different is the how you define the family leadership development. So, tell me a little bit about why do you call it family leadership development, and how would you tell someone, or how do you tell people to think about that in the work that you're doing?
I think that the most important person for any of us to lead, first and foremost, is ourselves. We talk about leadership in our society as being positional for the most part, that I'm leading out front, or I'm a servant leader, so I'm leading from behind, or I'm leading beside you. That's all
Mm,
about other people. I think life starts from the inside out. And where families and people in general tend to get in trouble, frankly, is not being able to manage our own emotional reactivity in challenging circumstances. So the key is to figure out how can I be the best version of myself? What can I do differently rather than wishing, hoping, praying, cajoling, bullying other people to be different? And so I start from that premise that if we are each able to better manage ourselves so that we can have those difficult conversations, there's no question that it's difficult to say some things to family members sometimes, more
Mhm.
difficult actually than it is to talk to people who we don't have to be concerned about seeing at the next family dinner. And so
Mhm.
that is where people get into trouble when we obfuscate, when we avoid, when we try to triangle other people in to have difficult conversations. And this is, I'm sure, a situation that a number of your listeners, as family office professionals, get pulled into a lot. I don't want to have this uncomfortable conversation with my son or daughter, with my daughter in law, with my dad, my mom. So I'm going to go ask the family office staff to do this for me or hire a consultant to have that conversation for me so that families are not building the capacity within the family itself to work through its own issues. Not only do I fundamentally believe that the most important person to lead is ourselves, I think that we all have the answers within ourselves to figure out whatever quandary we're in. And the challenge is if I just give someone an answer to a question, that's not helping them figure their way out the next time. Tell you a really quick
Mhm.
short story about my youngest brother. My youngest brother is 9 years younger than I am. I have two other brothers in between, but he and I are the closest. And when he was a young professional, I think he's probably still in business school. He would call me and ask me all kinds of questions about all kinds of things. And sometimes I think to myself, and why does he think I know the answer to that? It would be about business, about the lease on his apartment in New York, about girlfriends, all kinds of stuff. And then one day he called me and he said, "Have you noticed? I haven't called you recently to ask you, a zillion different questions about things." And I kind of paused and he said, "Well, no, of course, you didn't even notice that I haven't called you that much." And then he started to explain that he'd called me a few weeks earlier, but I wasn't available. My staff at the time I was practicing law in Miami, and my staff said, "Oh, I'm sorry, she's at court." I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get the message. I would have called you back." He says, "Oh, no, no, it's fine. I did not leave a message." And I said to them, "Don't worry about it. I'll just talk to her about it later." So he said, I sat back and I started thinking about it. And I said, if I talk to her, she's going to ask me this, this, and then she'll probably go there. And so I decided I would just ask myself all the questions that I thought you would
Oh my
ask
goodness.
me. And then I was able to figure it out for myself. So now I don't have to call you as much to ask you lots of questions. And to me, that's a classic example of helping other people to build their own capacity to think through their own issues rather than telling him an answer and then I'm going to get another call the next week about something else. So that's basically what I do. I think is I see my job as helping families to do two things. One, to see possibilities where they can't see them themselves. Oftentimes we are locked in this either or dynamic. The world is either red or it's blue. It's either black or it's white. When in actuality, I say to people, there are a whole lot of alphabets between A and Z. You just haven't explored very many of them. And so part of my job as someone who works with lots of families is to share with people different examples, different routes that they can take to see possibilities of how to get there. Because even if they see what they want to do, they're oftentimes convinced, oh, that can't happen for us. Our family's been this way forever. You don't understand my family. So one is to see possibilities and then two is to help them realize and explore those possibilities by building their capacity and their capability to get to where it is that they want to go. That
Mm.
starts with a lot of people, frankly, with first of all, just clarifying where is it that we want to go.
Right. Right. So you work with a number of families and have worked with a number of families over the years. What have you seen over that course of time that when a family is not willing to lead themselves first and then are maybe they're avoiding addressing tough situations? I'm going to take a leap here and say that you've probably seen a few families who had a hard time figuring out how to have those conversations. And then you've seen some that you've worked with, I know for a fact, that have figured it out and have put in the work. What do you see are having seen both sides, what do you see are the kind of those hidden risks of a family not putting in the effort to address things internally?
Well, the challenge is, frankly, it leads to fracturing the family. And because the clients that we're privileged to work with have significant wealth, it's usually jointly owned in some way. It's in a trust. It might be in some kind of an operating business, an investment company. There are all kinds of different legal mechanisms through which people own their shared assets. The reason you have a family office is because the family's working together collectively to manage their assets. And if the family can't have the conversations, the tough conversations, if they can't engage with each other in a productive and constructive way, it both fractures the family and can lead to cutoff, and it can put the assets at jeopardy.
Yeah.
End up with lawsuits. And the only people who, frankly, benefit from that are the litigators. It dissipates the wealth. And neither is
Yeah.
obviously a good place to be. I will say, though, you mentioned the consequences that you use the term willing in your question. I think that is, well, how much money does a family have to work with you? And I don't use financial criteria in the way that someone who's managing assets does. To me, it really comes down to the family's willingness to do the work. Because the difference between what I did as a lawyer, a client would come into my office, give me a problem. It's my job to figure out how to work through that. I'm the one who's going to
Mhm.
all the hearings. I'm talking to the judge. I'm talking to the jury. The client's just kind of there. When it comes to being in a better relationship with the family, there are some advisors who do that, but that's not the role that I choose to play because, again, I don't think it's helpful to the family in the long run. I'm trying to build their capacity to have those difficult conversations amongst themselves. So I will tell people I have a case right now where actually a therapist called me for a client and wants to convey messages back and forth between me and the client. I'm sorry, I don't do that. What I will do, though, I'm happy to have a conversation with the client and you on the call. And we can have a conversation, but I got a call literally out of the blue. Therapist ABCD, I say XYZ. A week later, the therapist came back to me. Oh, client has some questions. Great. Let's get client on the phone. But I'm not going to be going back and forth with you in the middle translating something that I've said and then coming back a week later with questions for her. That's not, frankly, I didn't say this, but it's just the fact. It's not a good use of any of our time, and it's not helpful to the client to have a conversation. If the client has a question for me, I'm always happy to answer. And this client knows how to reach me and has reached me in the past about any number of things, day and night, scheduled and unscheduled. But I don't believe that that's helpful to the client. So, and this is interesting because I've had that same conversation with that client in the past who wanted me to meet
Mm.
with a therapist. And I was like, okay, are you going to be there? If you're not going to be there, I'm not going to be there. And we went back and forth. And finally, the client said, okay, Thomasina. And the three of us had a delightful conversation. Part of
Do you
building the
think a lot of that
capacity.
Building the capacity, right? I mean, feels like so many of us, myself. I mean, I would put myself in that camp in some certain situations. You just don't necessarily, if you didn't learn have how to you didn't have the opportunity to build that capacity, as you say, or really learn how to have those conversations growing up, whether you're younger or in your earlier in your career. Those can be they can be difficult, and it can create a little bit of anxiety. Is you know in to even get those started. And I think one of the things that I have found so helpful with you is you're like, no, we just need to start talking, and let's find some words. So have you found in your work, obviously we have different communication styles. Some people are very direct and to the point, and others will use a whole lot of words and not really tell you anything. And by the end of it, you're like, I still got nothing. So, I mean, have you been able to find a way to work on both sides of that? Because a lot of times you have that inside the same nuclear family, the avoider and the I'm going to tell you everything right now. Have you been able to find ways to help bridge those communication um, techniques, uh, you know, inside a family to help build the capacity to build the stronger relationships?
So, multiple things in that question, the way I look at it. First, I think the biggest challenge is that human beings in general, we don't like to be uncomfortable. We
Sure.
want to do anything to avoid discomfort. But the only way to grow and to make progress is to be uncomfortable. It's like that saying, you can't get out of the thing alive. I mean, it's part of the growth process is to be uncomfortable. Struggle is just how it is. I don't know why, but it is. There's a parable about a little boy who knows that bugs come from cocoons, and he sees this butterfly struggling, trying to get out of the cocoon. So he decides he's going to be helpful, which I'll come back to the helpful point later. He wants to help this butterfly emerge and experience the world. So he gets a tiny little penknife and slices ever so gently the cocoon so that the butterfly can emerge. And what happens is the butterfly is not able to fly. Part of the
Mm.
process of struggling to get out of the cocoon is building the strength of the butterfly's wings. And if the butterfly doesn't do that, the butterfly never gets to fly. I had a family meeting not long ago where we took a break and the mom was very upset. She's, oh, Thomasina, we're in the ladies' room and she's crying. And, this is going to destroy my family, break my family apart. I said, no, it's not. Think about it. Your family has been through some tough stuff. And I just named a couple of examples of things. And she kind of looked at me. She says, yeah, I guess you're right about that. I said, and think about it. I'm dating myself here, but I remember the days when my grandmother had an old washing machine and you had to physically turn the handle to wring the clothes. Now they have all these fancy electronic things that are on the internet, and it's got a tiny little um, uh, what do they call that? Agitator in the middle. But it's still, to this day, you have to have agitation to get the dirt out. Whether you're, in some third world country and you got to beat your clothes with a rock, or you can put them in a fancy $2,000 machine. Agitation is part of the process. It's how we grow. There is a saying that the fruit is always out on the limb. We got to take some risk. And so, what I find is, particularly with families of wealth, they are used to everyone accommodating to their every wish, desire, even
Mm.
before they articulate it, whether they want it or not, doing for them rather than
Yep.
working with them. I think there's always a polite, diplomatic, respectful way to say no to someone on something that I don't think is helpful for them, and at the same time to offer an alternative, another possibility, another way of doing this. So when families have difficulty having conversations, I will say to people, I'm willing to help you have that conversation. I'm not going to utter the words for you. I was working with another family where the CEO, large family, his wife felt as though he was, quote, representing her branch of the family, and she refused after the first family meeting to engage with anything. But I would always send
Mm.
her the agendas for the meetings. I sent her the material after the fact. Some family members like, I don't know why you're doing that. You're just wasting your time. She had been branded as a, quote, troublemaker. So I'm doing that because that's my job. She's a part of the family. And you don't have to send it,
Sure.
but it's my job to involve everyone because I'm looking out for the family system. Lo and behold, about over a year into the engagement, one day my cell phone rings and it's her. And my first thought was, oh my God, something has happened to the CEO. Because why else would she be, seriously, why else would she be calling me?
Right.
She didn't call me in a year and a half, almost a year and a half. So I pick up the phone and I say, hi, Christy, how are you doing? Everything okay? And she just started out. She needed to vent. She was very upset about something that had happened in the family. And she was calling me because she felt like I was the person who had the courage to deliver a message, basically, to have a conversation with her sister-in-law about something. And
Mm.
I said, "Well, tell me what happened." And she went through some things, a lot of emotion, not a lot of facts. I'm trying to understand. So I listened and I let her vent. And I said, "Well, we haven't had that many conversations, so I appreciate you calling to reach out, but that's not really the how I function. That's not my role." I said, "What I'm happy to do is to help your husband have that conversation. If you think he needs to have it, I'm happy to help you have the conversation. We can strategize about what you want to say in a way that it can be heard. Because candidly, I think what you just said and the way you said it is going to go over her head. She's not going to hear it. So, what do you want? Do you want to just vent? Do you want to really have a conversation about this particular issue? I'm happy to help you figure that out. We can role play it. I'll role play the conversation with you. I will be there with you. But they were in a different city. I'll get on a plane and come and sit beside you to support you in having that conversation. But do you really want to have to call me, somebody you haven't talked to in a year and a half, when you want to have a conversation or deliver a message to someone in your family? I don't think that's the position you want to be in. I get that it's
Yeah.
difficult, but it's kind of like, a baby learning to walk. They're going to fall a few times. They crawl first, and then from the crawling to walking, they're going to fall. And sometimes they might bump their head on the coffee table. It may hurt, but they learn to
Mhm.
walk so that that doesn't happen over and over again. And she listened for a while and she said, the first point, I said a few things, and then she says, well, good luck with that. So I kept talking to her and explaining it and talked about, do you really want to call me? And then she finally said, okay, 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 Thomasina. Okay, like I give up. But I mean, I didn't think that would have been helpful. Now, I will admit that my
Right.
way is not the only way. There are some consultants that she could have called and they would have immediately picked up the phone and called her sister in law and conveyed the message. I think I just choose to do it differently because I want to be helpful over the long term. So that the family may at some point won't need me or will only need me every
Right.
now and then to come in and facilitate, an annual family meeting or something like that. The difference I think between my approach and a lot of people is that, as I was talking about earlier, we as humans don't want to be uncomfortable. So a lot of people are focused on helping people feel good, be comfortable rather than helping them up level their functioning. If I
Mm,
learn how to have the difficult conversation by working with someone in a supportive, non-judgmental way, I will feel better because I'll know that I can handle this situation. How I see it.
right. Teach them to fish. Don't just go get the fish for them.
Yeah, you can use that analogy. That's a good one
I
that
mean,
works. And I think that is,
I like the butterfly.
yeah, that's, I think, a great example. I think also that people need to exercise this muscle. I did a blog post from my newsletter a few months ago, and I analogized it to working out physically. I work out with a trainer 4 times a week, and when you're working with someone else, they have the ability to see in us things that we don't see in ourselves. I I'm less than
Absolutely.
110 pounds. I never ever would do that on my own. But my trainer saw that within me. And so we didn't just go and pick up 110 pounds. We worked on it over a period of time so that I developed that muscle. It's the same thing when we're talking about having difficult conversations with our families. And a lot of times I find that people are avoiding conversations, and we've developed whole scenarios and TV series in our heads that don't have any real grounding in reality. And sometimes we make ourselves anxious about what if, what could be, rather than thinking about what do I want to be, and then who do I need to be able to get there. And that is the difference between trying to make everybody feel good today and helping them function better today so that ultimately they will feel much better.
Yeah. I, so many parallels. I mean, that you're that not only do these parables, these stories translate to, I mean, it translates to business side. It translates to obviously ultra high net worth families communicating. It translates to every family communicating and learning how to develop those skills to learn what's inside of you, lead yourself, and then be who you need to be to have the conversations with other people. Did I get that close to right?
I mean, that is certainly, yes, absolutely. It's interesting. I don't remember the exact time frame, but years and years ago, Simon Sinek popularized the notion that the most important question is why. Know your why, know your why. And I think why is very
Yeah.
important. It's very important. Lots of consultants start their work with families asking their why. I like to go deeper and ask families to contemplate, what is it that drives your why? And for most people, what drives their why is their who they are
Mhm.
individually and collectively as a family. So in my work with families, I focus on the who part first. Who individuals are, because one of the challenges that families oftentimes have is individuals can get lost in their family story, particularly if you are from a very well known family, a family that's high profile. There are all kinds of expectations that are put on family members around who they are, who they should be, that have no bearing on who they are as individuals. And particularly for young people, it can be very confusing. Uh, you know, are people engaging with me because I am me, or because they know that my family has wealth and access to things they don't have access to? So all of those kinds of
Yeah.
questions, I think, are why it's so important to start with the who, knowing for myself who I am, not confusing my self worth with whatever my net worth is. And when I am grounded in who I am, anchored by my own values, by what I think about whatever the issue is, rather than just agreeing with other people, be they in my family or not, because I want to keep everybody happy, everybody comfortable. So long as I'm grounded in that, that is then my foundation for moving forward in the world to do whatever it is I want to do. Have difficult conversations or not have difficult conversations. Go into the
Right.
family office, not go into the family office. Work in the family business, work in the family foundation, go off and do my own thing. And still, even if I choose a different path, still be able to have the direct engagement to stay connected to my family.
Love that. I love that your self worth is not defined by your net worth.
That happens for a
I
lot of
mean,
people, a lot of young people in particular. Again, it's like I don't really know. All of a sudden, I have all these friends because they found out my family has money. Or is it because they discovered
right.
that I like going to opera or whatever and they like opera? I mean, it really causes a lot of self doubt for people. And then when people do not have to work to be able to take care of their basic needs, like, food, clothing, shelter, that also can be very unsettling for some people because of the way that our society defines wealth, all the kinds of things that are layered onto money. I part of a conversation with someone, this was a couple of years ago, uh, oldest in the family, dad created this phenomenally successful business, sold it to one of the largest companies in the country. Everybody instantly became literally a billionaire. This person was sharing a story and broke down in tears, literally 30 years later, because it had deprived the person of what they thought was going to be their future. They thought they were the heir apparent as the oldest to run this very successful business that everyone had kind of, the family culture had kind of all revolved around. And when the dad
Mm.
sold the business, this person who could have gone out and started any number of other businesses on their own felt somehow that it was debilitating. Seriously. So the person
Mm.
never started a business, never honestly did anything that we would consider, quote, work in today's world. And 30 years later, that was still upsetting for that person. I was privileged to be
Yeah.
to be actually the first family dynamics consultant that Wells Fargo Private Bank hired to come in house and do this work with families making generational transitions. Similar case, young man always thought he was going to be the heir apparent to run the business. Dad sells the business. Everybody becomes an instant millionaire. Dad's thought process, well, I built this so that my family did not have to work, did not have to do what I had to do. My son can go and do whatever he
Right.
wants. His son stopped talking to him for a full year. He was that devastated. So again, we think
Wow.
we have all these stereotypes about what wealth means and how people should and shouldn't deal with it. But on the inside, we never know what people are going through. And to me, it's important to start there so that there's some firm footing. In those two cases I mentioned, the family fine financially for generations. There's tons of money. It wasn't about the money. They had tied their
Right.
identity to that. So who am I if I'm not running this business? Or heaven forbid, the stock market crashes or we have another real estate bubble and the money disappears, then who am I? That's why I think it's so important to start
Right.
with the who. And then there are a couple of obviously other pieces, but to me, that's the foundational piece.
Love that. So as we wrap up this conversation, we could go on for hours. We need to wrap up so we don't have hours of content. But What are some of the I feel like you've given us a ton of little nuggets throughout this whole conversation. How does a family recognize when they when it's important to bring in a professional like yourself to help them have better conversations and build the muscle to not only do it themselves but to teach their kids, and for that, because if one generation learns it, often it does get passed down, whether it's a good habit or a bad habit, often those get passed down. And so how can a family like think about, I'm seeing this or I'm hearing this, what puts them to think, maybe having a professional like Thomasina would be great to help us build that muscle and build that foundation?
If you
What are those triggers?
Yeah, well, if you think about it, anybody at the top of their game in our society has at least one coach, and oftentimes multiple coaches,
Mm.
whether they're a top athlete or they're a CEO of a global enterprise. They have a coach because they're constantly trying to figure out, how do I get to the top of my game and stay there? And, life is a
Absolutely.
journey, it's not a destination. Things are happening, the family is growing. People are marrying into the family. Children are being born. Maybe there's a change in some industry that was the source of the family wealth. All kinds of things are happening. Life cycle. People are just growing up. They're in a different place. And it can be helpful for families to have a coach or someone from the outside who can see things they can't see. One of my favorite cartoons I found at some point during the pandemic was a graphic of a sketch of a jar. And there's a woman inside the jar who's kind of got her hands spread on the glass and her legs are kind of out. And she's peering out. And the label says, it's difficult to read the label from inside the jar. It's why people have coaches.
Mm.
So you don't have to have
Yeah.
something terrible happening in your family to bring in someone like me. People who are most successful, frankly, are proactive and want to avoid having something catastrophic. I go back to the fact that the most important factor is the willingness of at least one person within the family to think about what is going on differently and then to take the initiative to themselves do something differently. Our tendency as human beings is to point a finger. Thomasina, if you could just help these young people, everything will be great. Then I go talk to the young people, and they're like, Thomasina, if you could just get our parents to back up a little bit, give us some space, we can show them what we can do. But the nature of
Yeah.
relationship is that it's symbiotic. It's like a dance. If you and I are
Mm.
sisters and we have some sort of tension between us, if I keep coming at you, we're going to continue to have tension between us. But if I decide to take a
Sure.
different approach, that issue may still exist between us. But our relationship will be different if I decide that I want to respond and I want to engage with you differently. So, a willingness
Mm.
to see things a little bit differently, which usually involves zooming out to get the big picture, to get more context. And you mentioned about things passing down from generation to generation. That is the case with how we tend to deal with challenges of all types. It's usually
Yeah.
people, it's learned behavior. And sometimes it's not even something that we're consciously aware of about what has happened in prior generations. So I think the willingness to think differently and to do differently rather than only, again, thinking, hoping, praying, cajoling other people will do something and somehow be differently is the most important thing that people can start to do. And that starts, first of all, just observing what is going on, what is happening in our family, and what's my role in that. If somebody,
Mm.
there are a number, one of the biggest challenges that we as human beings are hardwired to be comfortable and to defend ourselves when there's anything that makes us uncomfortable or when we perceive that there's some sort of attack. And so people can also begin to appreciate that Most folks, most folks, frankly, are doing the best they can. It's really a coping
Yeah.
mechanism. Whether somebody chooses to withdraw into themselves and say nothing and not engage, or to move across the country, or whether somebody's coping mechanism might be conflict and to strike out and to always have an argument. People are doing the best they can. So I urge people just to give each other a little space and grace, understand more about how families work, and then be really clear about, well, what am I willing to do differently? As opposed to hoping other
Mhm.
people will do something differently.
Right. Ultimately, you're not going to change the other people, but you get to change your attitude and your reaction toward it.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
interesting. Parents will often literally say to me, "Well, Thomasina, I just want you to work with my kids and help them get along better. It's always about somebody else." But inevitably, the other family members are interacting in the way they are because that's how the system has learned to cope. And they're oftentimes responding to
Yeah.
something that the parent has done. So relationships are by definition two-way streets. It's easier for us to see what the other person is doing, but a relationship requires at least two of us. And so that's why if
Yeah.
I do something differently, it may take some time. It might be, I say, like a ripple across the pond, or it might be seismic. It all depends, and it may not necessarily happen instantaneously, but it does start, I think, with a willingness to be open to looking at things differently and to trying some things differently.
Yeah. I love it. Uh, Thank you so much, Thomasina, for your time today and for the lessons and nuggets that are in these stories because they are numerous. So, for everyone who's listening, I hope you were taking notes and taking some of those down. I know that every time I talk to you and you say some of the key phrases, I'm like, yep, yep, yep. She said that before. I needed to hear that again. So thank you for that. If someone's listening and they want to reach out, what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
Probably the easiest thing to do is just reach out via my website, which is developfamilyleaders.com. Developfamilyleaders.com. If they want to send me a direct email, that is thwilliams at developfamilyleaders.com.
Perfect. Very good. We will also link to your website in the show notes. So if someone wants to find it there, they'll be able to as well. So, all right. Thank you again, Thomasina. So appreciate your time and your wisdom. And I sincerely hope that for everyone who's listening or watching, that you saw a little bit, even just few little things that you can do to improve and build those communication muscles between yourself and your family and those around you. So thank you, Thomasina.
Thank you, Christy, for inviting me to be your guest. I enjoyed our conversation, and thank you to the listeners.
Very good. Thank you for joining me today on the Family Office Success Podcast. I hope you found this conversation insightful and valuable as you navigate the complexities of family office services. If you're looking for more ideas or resources or want to explore how we can support your family office or your family through services and training and strategy, connect with me on LinkedIn or visit our website at whiteriverconsultants.com and be sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates and expert insights. And if you're ready to take your family office to the next level, consider joining our mastermind where we can help you manage that chaos and create better outcomes for the families you serve. Until next time, I'm Christy Van Rite, and this has been the Family Office Success Podcast. Take care and keep building for the future.